Naomi Garrett was 38 years old when she buried her father on a Tuesday in October, and her husband stood at the reception afterward with a glass of bourbon in his hand and a smile he did not think anyone was close enough to see. She saw it. She had always seen things other people considered themselves invisible doing. It was, as her father would have said, an occupational hazard of paying attention, and Naomi had been paying attention to Marcus Garrett for long enough to know the difference between a man grieving beside her and a man calculating beside her. Marcus wore the same dark suit to both activities. He had learned, over 9 years of marriage, to make the expressions look similar. But the eyes were different. The eyes, on the day of Elias Beaumont's funeral, had the quality of a man walking towards something he had been waiting on a long time. She knew what he was waiting on. She had known for 3 months. What Marcus did not know, what he had never asked, never wondered, never thought to examine beneath the surface of the life they shared in their mid-century brick house in Memphis, was that Elias Beaumont had spent the last 4 years restructuring his estate with a specificity and a care that had accounted for every variable, including Marcus. The will was read on Thursday, 2 days after the funeral, in the offices of an estate attorney named Franklin Cole, who had handled Elias Beaumont's affairs for 21 years and who carried that weight in his posture. Marcus arrived in a different suit. He sat beside Naomi with his knees slightly angled toward the door, the way a man sits when he expects to leave quickly with something good in his hands. Franklin Cole opened the document. He read for 11 minutes. The number he read aloud, in connection with the trust established solely in Naomi's name, was 2. $3 billion. Marcus did not move for a very long time. He had married a woman he believed was the modest daughter of a modest man. He had been wrong about both. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The light in Memphis in late October comes in at a low, amber angle that falls differently on everything it touches, making familiar things look briefly like something you are seeing for the first time. Naomi sat at the kitchen table the morning after her father's funeral with her hands wrapped around a mug, and the light crossing the tile floor she had regrouted herself 3 summers ago, a weekend project her father had suggested when she mentioned the old grout was cracking, and that he had driven from his home across town to oversee, kneeling on the floor in his good slacks to show her the corner technique, talking while he worked in the quiet, instructional way that had defined most of what she knew about doing things right. Elias Beaumont had been a lot of things in his 71 years, and the world had known very few of them. In Memphis, he was known as a retired school teacher who had spent 33 years in the public school system teaching mathematics, and who lived modestly in a house on the east side of the city with a vegetable garden he tended with the same patient attention he had given his students. His neighbors knew him as a man who brought tomatoes to their porches in August and who fixed things when they broke, and who could be heard, on warm evenings, playing old recordings of Sam Cooke and Aretha Franklin through a screen door left open to the night air. They did not know about the real estate holdings. They did not know about the investment portfolio he had built over 40 years with the quiet, methodical discipline of a man who understood that mathematics was not a classroom subject, but a language for describing reality. They did not know about the mineral rights, the commercial properties across 4 states, the fund positions that had compounded in his name for 2 decades without anyone looking over his shoulder. He had told Naomi everything when she was 26. He had sat her down at that same kitchen table in his house and told her in the way he told her all important things, without drama, as if he were explaining a proof, stating what was true and then explaining why it was true and then explaining what it required of her. He said, "Naomi, I built this quietly because quiet was the only way it was ever going to get done. I need you to understand it so you can decide what to do with it. That is all it is. It is information. Do with it what is right. She had spent 12 years learning what was right. Her profession was architecture. She worked for a firm downtown on projects that were real and demanding, and that she was good at, designing structures that stood correctly, that handled weight the way weight needed to be handled, that used light and space in ways that served the people inside them. She found that the same principles that governed good buildings governed most things worth doing. Distribute the load evenly. Design for the long term. Do not put ornament where you need structure. She had met Marcus at an industry mixer 8 years earlier, introduced by a mutual colleague who thought they would get along. Marcus was a commercial mortgage broker, the kind of man who filled a room with a specific useful energy. People liked talking to him. He made complex things feel accessible, and he remembered names. She had found this appealing. Over 2 years of dating, she had found him to be genuinely warm in ways that mattered, and genuinely careful in ways that eventually began to feel like management rather than love. She had noted the difference. She had chosen to keep going. She had convinced herself, as people do, that noting a thing was the same as addressing it. The early signs had arrived the way early signs always do, quietly, wearing the costume of something else. A comment about her salary, once, that came out of his mouth as a compliment and landed in her chest as a measurement. A conversation with his colleague at a dinner party where Marcus had described her work with a vagueness that suggested he either did not know the details or preferred not to give them. A Wednesday evening when she had come home to find he had moved her drafting table from the small studio room off the kitchen to the garage because, he said, he needed the room for a home office. She had not said what she thought about it. She had moved the drafting table back the following Saturday while he was at golf and said nothing at all. The last 8 months had been different in quality from everything before them. Something in Marcus had shifted, not dramatically. Not in a way she could point to cleanly, but in the way that a building shifts before it settles wrong. Incrementally and almost invisibly until the crack appears in the wall and you realize it has been developing for years. Her father had gotten sick in February. By April, the prognosis had changed from manageable to not. She had spent the summer driving between Memphis and her own house in the evenings, being present, being useful. Sitting with him in the garden and listening to him talk about the things a man talks about when he has decided to look his life in the face without blinking. Marcus had accompanied her twice. Both times he had been pleasant, attentive, correct in his behavior in the way that a man is when he is performing rather than feeling. She had set it aside to grieve. She had not set aside what she observed. The second phone was in the glove box. Naomi was not looking for it. She had borrowed Marcus's car on a Thursday in August, 6 weeks before her father died, because her own car was at the shop for a brake issue she had noticed 2 weeks earlier and finally scheduled. She needed a charging cable from the glove box. She opened the glove box. A phone she did not recognize slid forward when the door dropped. Slim, newer than his daily phone, in a case the color of slate. She picked it up. Her hands did not shake. Her face remained perfectly calm. She set it on the passenger seat beside her and looked at it for a moment with the same steady attention she brought to a structural drawing with an error in it, noting the error, locating its implications, understanding what the error told her about everything that depended on it. The phone had a passcode. She could not access it directly. She set it back in the glove box, in the same position she had found it, used the cable, and drove to work. That afternoon she called a close friend, Renata, a corporate attorney she had known since college, who was direct and practical, and who listened to the full account with the focused attention Naomi had always trusted. "He's been out at least twice a month for 4 months," Naomi said. Evening meetings he doesn't detail. A key on his ring I don't recognize. And now this. Don't confront, Renata said immediately. Not yet. Document first. Do you have the doorbell camera? Naomi had installed a doorbell camera 2 years ago at Renata's suggestion after a package went missing from the porch. It stored 60 days of cloud footage. She had never gone back and watched any of it. That evening, she opened the archive on her laptop while Marcus was in the shower and reviewed the prior 8 weeks of daytime footage. Forwarding through with the efficient dispassion of a project manager reviewing site logs. On 6 separate occasions between 12:30 and 4 in the afternoon, a car she did not recognize, a silver sedan, newer, clean, was parked in front of their house for between 45 minutes and 2 hours. On 3 of those occasions, the footage showed a woman entering the front door with a key. Naomi watched all 6 clips. She exported them to her personal cloud storage. She noted the dates in a document she kept on her work laptop under a project folder name that would not attract any attention. She moved with the same deliberate calm that had always defined her. Over the following 3 weeks, she gathered what she needed. Bank records from their joint account showed a pattern she might have explained away 6 months ago, but could not now. Regular withdrawals in amounts between $400 and $900. Spaced irregularly, totaling $14,300 over the prior 10 months. A restaurant charge she recognized, not from any evenings she had shared with him. 2 hotel charges in a city 2 hours from Memphis. On weekends she had been alone with her father at the hospital. She documented everything. She labeled everything. She organized it the way she organized project files, systematically, completely, with a summary on top, and the evidence beneath it in chronological order. She opened a folder on her desktop. She named it Estate. It was a word with more than one meaning. She intended both. Renata cleared her Thursday morning on the first week of September and met Naomi at her office. A clean space in a building downtown that smelled of coffee and the kind of focus that expensive hourly rates tend to produce. She reviewed everything Naomi had brought. The account records, the doorbell footage, the hotel charges, the timeline she had constructed, with the systematic efficiency of a woman who had spent 20 years in corporate litigation and had a particular professional distaste for people who believed they had been clever. She was not unkind. She was thorough in the way that good attorneys are thorough, not leaving a single question answered by assumption. He's positioning for divorce, she said when she finished. These withdrawals aren't spending, they're staging. He's moving money somewhere it won't appear in a joint account audit. He would have moved when it was most advantageous to him. After the estate, Naomi said. Renata looked up. Tell me about the estate. Naomi told her. Not everything, not the full picture her father had shared years ago. That would come later, with Franklin Cole. But enough. Enough to make Renata set her pen down on the legal pad and look at her client with the kind of full, recalibrated attention that precedes a shift in the room's entire temperature. He has no knowledge of any of it, Naomi said. None? My father was very careful. I was very careful. Marcus has never asked me a substantive question about my family's finances. He looked at what he could see and decided that was everything. Renata was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city moved in its ordinary way, unhurried by what was happening inside this particular office. The will is being read when? She asked. 2 days after the funeral. I want to be in that room, Renata said. You will be, Naomi said. Real power operated in quiet rooms. On the Sunday before her father's funeral, Naomi drove to the east side of Memphis to spend the afternoon with her father's sister, her Aunt Dolores, who was 68 years old and had lived 3 blocks from Elias Beaumont her entire adult life, and who had sat with Naomi through the entire long summer of his illness, without once asking what was going to happen next, because she already trusted. What Naomi was doing, which was the most useful kind of trust available. Dolores made food the way she always made food, seriously and in quantity. And she sat across from Naomi at Elias's kitchen table, the same chairs, and she listened to everything Naomi needed to say about Marcus, with the particular patience of a woman who has watched people long enough to have seen this kind of story run its course before. "Your daddy knew," Dolores said when Naomi finished. It was not a question. He suspected. He never said so directly. He wouldn't. He was a gentleman. She looked at her niece steadily. He did say once, to me, that Marcus reminded him of a student he used to have. Smart enough to see the test. Not wise enough to understand what the test was really for. Naomi looked at her father's kitchen, at the window over the sink he had replaced himself, at the garden visible through the glass, at the tomato stakes he had left in the ground for next season, as though he had expected to get back to them. "He told me once," Naomi said quietly, "that patience was not the same as waiting. He said, patience was active. It was building something while other people assumed you were still." Dolores nodded. That was Elias. Naomi drove home through the amber Memphis evening, with her father's words settled in her chest like load-bearing stone. Franklin Cole's office on Thursday was quiet in the way of rooms designed to hold difficult information without spilling it. The furniture was dark walnut. The carpet absorbed sound. The window looked into a courtyard with a single crepe myrtle that had finished blooming but held its structure against the October sky like something that knew its own design. Naomi arrived first. Renato was already there. Dolores sat beside Naomi, her hands folded in her lap, wearing the gray dress she had worn to Elias's graduation ceremony 30 years earlier, because she had always been a woman who wore the same garment to both celebrations and conclusions. Marcus arrived 6 minutes late and did not apologize. He sat beside Naomi and arranged himself in the chair with the ease of a man who has already decided how the next hour is going to feel. He crossed one ankle over the other knee. He looked at Franklin Cole with the expectant politeness of a person waiting for a package they know has their name on it. Franklin Cole had known Elias Beaumont for 21 years. He had helped him structure the estate in its current form over 4 years of deliberate, careful work. He opened the document with the gravity of someone who understood that the paper in his hands represented a man's complete understanding of his life and the people in it. He read the personal bequests first. Dolores, a colleague, a former student, who had stayed in Elias's life for 30 years, a donation to the school where he had taught. He read them in the unhurried voice of a man who had done this many times, and understood that each name deserved its full weight in the room. Then he came to the trust. He read the name of the trust. He read the date of its establishment. He read the amendments made in the final year of Elias's life, which had included one addition, a clause specifying that no portion of the trust's assets, income, distributions, or properties was accessible to, inheritable by, or attachable in any legal proceeding by any spouse of Naomi Beaumont Garrett, and that, in the event of a divorce, no portion of trust assets would be considered marital property under any applicable law in any jurisdiction. The trust having been established entirely from Naomi's premarital inheritance rights, and structured accordingly across 21 years of estate planning. Then he read the number. $2.3 billion. Marcus did not move. Naomi watched his face the way she watched a structure under stress, looking for where the response appeared first, where the design showed its limits. She had, in her years of architecture, seen buildings perform beautifully under load right up until the moment they did not. She watched the understanding move through Marcus from the outside in. First the number, then the clause, then the realization of what the clause meant for the exit he had been quietly constructing for the better part of a year. He turned to look at her. His expression had the quality of a man who has walked into a room that was not the room he thought the door opened into. She looked back at him with the steady patience of someone who has been in this room the entire time. Franklin Cole set down the document. "Mrs. Garrett," he said, "I'll need approximately 90 minutes of your time after this for the initial summary of administrative steps." "Of course," she said. Marcus said, "There must be," and then stopped. Renata, who was seated on Naomi's other side and who had been still for the last 20 minutes with the precision of a woman who knows exactly when stillness is the most effective thing in the room, said in a quiet and entirely professional voice, "Mr. Garrett, I represent Mrs. Garrett in this matter. If you have questions about the trust structure or the clause related to marital assets, I'm happy to direct you to a colleague who can advise you independently." He looked at Renata. He looked at Naomi. He looked at Dolores, who was looking at the crepe myrtle through the window with the expression of a woman who has already finished with a particular chapter and is simply letting it close. Naomi reached into her bag and set a second folder on the table beside Franklin Cole's document. Inside it were the bank records, the doorbell footage, the hotel receipts, the timeline. She had organized them the same way she organized everything, systematically, completely, with the summary on top. "There's also this," she said calmly. She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. "Renata has the matching files. I've retained a family law attorney as well. I expect this to move efficiently." Marcus looked at the folder. He looked at the table. He looked at the room as though it had reconfigured itself around him, which in every way that mattered, it had. "You build a structure correctly," Naomi said, "and it holds exactly as long as it needs to. My father taught me that." She stood, smoothed the front of her jacket, and turned to Franklin Cole. "Shall we begin?" She did not look back at Marcus. The room was very quiet. It held. 10 months later, Naomi sat at the table on the screened porch of the house she had designed and built for herself on a lot her father had left her on a bluff outside Memphis, with a view east across a wide creek toward stands of old growth oak that turned colors in October the way her father had always loved. The house was timber frame with a wraparound porch, the proportions she had learned to understand over years of practice. And it was built to last the way things built with care and patience, and the correct distribution of weight always last. The garden was hers now. She had transplanted some of her father's plants, the herbs, the tomato stakes, a rose bush that had grown against the south wall of his house for 15 years, into the new soil, and they had taken. Her father would have found that appropriate. A man named Gregory, a landscape architect she had met through a professional collaboration on a park project in the spring, sat beside her reading something and asking nothing that was not his business to ask. He was 42 and genuinely curious about the world and had a steady quality that she recognized from her father and from the best buildings she had ever walked through. The sense of something made to hold up over time, not to impress on first inspection. He had met Dolores once, and Dolores had called Naomi afterward and said, "He has good manners, and he listened to your daddy's story without interrupting." This was, in Dolores's economy of praise, a significant review. Marcus had not contested the divorce. Renata had expected some resistance. There was none worth naming. The bank accounts he had been siphoning were subpoenaed. The withdrawals were characterized as marital waste in the filing. The woman from the doorbell footage had, by all accounts, ended things within days of the will reading, a timeline Naomi noted without comment. He had moved to a smaller apartment in a different part of the city and had taken on work that was quieter and less visible than the life he had been building toward. His name had not appeared in any professional context she was aware of, in connection with anything that suggested the trajectory he had imagined for himself was continuing. She heard these things through the ordinary channels of a city that was not quite large enough to keep everything separate. She registered them. She did not dwell in them. Bitterness required an ongoing emotional investment in people who no longer deserved it, and Naomi Beaumont Garrett had never been careless with her investments. She held her coffee mug with both hands and watched the morning light come across the creek the way her father had always described light on water. Patient, she thought. It moved the way patient things move, without hurrying, confident that it would get where it was going, because it always did. She was solvent. She was building. She had built everything worth keeping. She was, in every sense her father had ever intended, free. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.